Why some grandparents say no to babysitting and don't feel guilty. They asked you again, didn't they? It probably started with a kind voice over the phone or a message with a heart emoji. Can you watch the kids on Saturday? Just a few hours, just until dinner, just like last time. And somewhere between the words sure and let me see, you felt it, that familiar tug inside you. Love, guilt, resentment, fatigue, all wrapped together in a smile they'll never see. You love your grandchildren more than words can hold. Their laughter warms your bones. Their tiny arms around your neck remind you why you pushed through the hardest years of your life. But lately, and maybe this is the first time you've really let yourself admit it, you're tired. Not just tired in your body, but in your soul. And more than that, you're beginning to wonder something no one ever told you it was okay to ask. What about me? That's the part no one seems to talk about. The part where your time, your health, your needs quietly step aside for yet another round of caretaking. You raised your own children, gave them your best years, your midnight feeds, your worn-down shoes and stretched budgets. And now, with a little more gray in your hair and maybe a little arthritis in your hands, they ask you to do it all over, again. But this time, you've learned something. You've learned that saying no doesn't mean you don't love them. It doesn't mean you're selfish or cold or uncaring. It means you are finally starting to value your own time, your own peace, your own right to choose what this season of your life looks like. And maybe for the first time in a long time, you're starting to realize you don't owe anyone your exhaustion. This isn't a story about bitterness. It's a story about boundaries, about wisdom, about love that knows its limits and refuses to feel guilty for it. It's about the courage it takes to protect your joy, even when the world tells you that good grandparents never say no. Well, some do, and maybe, just maybe, those are the ones who figured out something the rest of us are still learning. So let's talk about it, not with shame, but with honesty. Let's explore the reasons why more and more grandparents are stepping back from babysitting, and why doing so might be one of the most loving choices they ever make. Before they became grandma or grandpa, they were people. Individuals with dreams, with careers, with heartbreaks and healing, with identities that had nothing to do with snack cups or diaper bags. Many of them lived decades full of sacrifice, waking up before dawn, working multiple jobs, holding families together with quiet strength and few thanks. They gave up hobbies, ambitions, and sometimes even parts of themselves to raise children who now have children of their own. So when someone says no to babysitting, it's not because they don't adore their grandchildren. It's because they've already lived a full life of caretaking, and sometimes they're ready to rest. That's not laziness. That's humanity. Too often we forget just how much energy raising children demands. We expect grandparents to be endlessly available, forgetting that they're older now, with different physical limits. But more than that, many of them finally have time to breathe, to sleep in, to read a book in silence, to tend to a garden they never had time for before, to travel, to dance, to walk through life at a slower, more deliberate pace. Saying yes to babysitting every week or every day can feel like slipping back into a role they already graduated from. And some grandparents feel deeply and unapologetically that they've earned their retirement, not just financially, but emotionally in day. In fact, one grandmother shared in a letter, "I raised 5 kids. I worked 35 years. I paid off a mortgage, buried a husband, beat breast cancer, and now that I finally have a little money and time to travel, people act shocked when I say no to watching toddlers. I don't feel bad. I feel free." It's not that she doesn't love her grandkids. It's that she loves herself enough now, too. Some grandparents still work. Some are caretakers for aging spouses. Some are managing health conditions no one sees. And for some, this stage of life is the only real freedom they've ever had. Choosing to protect that isn't selfish, it's sacred. They're not stepping away from love. They're stepping into their own hard-earned peace. There's a quiet but growing rebellion among some grandparents. A soft, steady voice rising from the corners of living rooms and park benches saying, "I am more than what you need from me. Because for some, being a grandparent has become less about sharing stories and more about unpaid childcare. The identity of grandma or grandpa starts to feel less like a badge of honor and more like a job title they never applied for. Of course, many find joy in babysitting, especially when it's on their terms. But what stings is when their time is treated like it doesn't have value. When a retired grandmother is expected to drop everything for last-minute school pickups, or when a grandfather is guilt-tripped for saying he can't watch the baby every weekday. The assumption that they don't have anything better to do, but they do, or at least they should be allowed to. They have yoga classes and walking groups, doctor's appointments, volunteer commitments, choir rehearsal, bridge night, or simply the quiet pleasure of waking up without an alarm clock and sipping coffee in peace. That time isn't free, it's theirs, and it's every bit as valid as the responsibilities of a working parent. Some grandparents are discovering that the best way to stay emotionally healthy and connected to their grandkids is by not being overused, by preserving their identity, by reminding their families gently but firmly that they are not on-call nannies. They're human beings with their own needs, their own lives, and their own priorities. One grandfather said it best in a community forum. "My name is George. I'm 72. I love fishing, jazz music, crossword puzzles, and my 3 grandkids. I'll happily babysit sometimes, but I didn't retire just to start working again for free. I want to be a grandparent, not a third parent." There's a difference. That difference matters, because when grandparents are treated with respect, they have more to give, not less. They give from a place of joy, not obligation, and their love becomes a gift, not a duty. By saying, "I'm not a built-in babysitter," they're not rejecting family, they're reclaiming their full selves. And in doing so, they model something powerful for the next generation. That boundaries are healthy, that self-worth is not selfish, and that every chapter of life deserves to be lived with intention. To the outside world, babysitting may seem simple. After all, what's a few hours with the grandkids? A trip to the park, some screen time, snacks, and nap schedules. But beneath that innocent request lies a truth many don't understand, especially younger parents. Babysitting is not light work. For grandparents, especially those over 60, it can be physically grueling. Lifting toddlers, bending to pick up toys, chasing kids across playgrounds, or simply being alert for every cry and spill can leave an aging body sore for days. For those with arthritis, back problems, heart conditions, or chronic fatigue, even a few hours can be deeply draining, and the toll isn't just physical. Many grandparents silently carry the emotional and mental strain that comes from constant caretaking. They worry about doing everything right according to their children's standards, screen time rules, feeding schedules, nap routines. They fear being judged for letting the toddler watch a cartoon or for not preparing an organic lunch. They try to remember food allergies, sleep regressions, or sensory sensitivities they never had to consider with their own kids. It becomes a tightrope walk, full of love, but layered with pressure. Some also carry a hidden grief. Babysitting. Full-time reminds them of things they've lost. Energy, time, freedom, sometimes even their sense of peace. It can reopen wounds, especially for widowed grandparents or those who raise children alone. Being in the trenches again can stir memories they'd rather let rest. One grandmother wrote anonymously, "I said yes because I felt I had to. But after a few months of caring for my grandson 5 days a week, I found myself crying in the bathroom. During nap time, I was 68 and more tired than I'd ever been, physically and emotionally. I wasn't just watching him. I was grieving the life I had planned for this chapter. There's no shame in this exhaustion, but there is shame in how rarely it's acknowledged. When grandparents express their fatigue, it's often dismissed. You only have them a few hours. At least you get to see them. We didn't ask you to do everything, but the truth is they do everything. Because they care. Because they were raised to be responsible. Because they love deeply, even when it costs them dearly. That cost, in their bodies, their sleep, their inner calm, is often invisible. So when some grandparents say no, it isn't rejection, it's survival. It's the wisdom to know their own limits and the courage to speak them aloud. And in a world that praises hustle and endless sacrifice, that's an act of bravery. There's a quiet generational wound that many grandparents carry, one that traces back to when they were young parents themselves. Back then, the conversation around mental health, personal space, and emotional boundaries didn't exist the way it does today. They didn't talk about burnout. They didn't have parenting podcasts or self-care routines. They were taught to endure, to tough it out, to give everything without ever asking for anything in return. And so they did. They raised children without asking for breaks. They worked long hours and came home to cook and clean. They smiled through sadness, parented through pain, and held the family together like glue that was never allowed to crack. But now, something different is happening. Now, they see their own children, the parents of today, asking for help, setting boundaries, talking openly about their needs. And sometimes it stirs something strange, a mix of pride, envy, and regret. Some grandparents say yes to babysitting out of love. Others say yes out of habit, because saying no was never an option when they were parents. They don't want to be judged. They don't want to be seen as less generous. They don't want to disappoint the children they worked so hard to raise. But here's the truth. Some are learning, for the very first time, how to set boundaries now. And it's not easy. Saying no as a parent is hard. Saying no, as a grandparent, especially to your own adult child, can feel like betrayal. It can feel like guilt pressing down on your chest, like a voice inside whispering, "You're being selfish. You should do more. What kind of grandparent are you?" But some are pushing back against that voice, gently, firmly, lovingly. They are learning that boundaries don't break relationships. In fact, they protect them. When grandparents are allowed to say "not today," or "just for a few hours," or "I'm not available this weekend," they remain emotionally whole. They avoid resentment. They avoid burnout. And they show their adult children that mutual respect goes both ways. One grandfather shared this with his daughter. "When you were a baby, I never got a break. I never learned how to say no. I'm trying to learn that now, at 70. Please don't take it as rejection. I'm trying to be a better version of myself, not a tired one." That honesty, that vulnerability, it matters. Because when grandparents draw boundaries, they're not pushing people away. They're finally stepping into the space they were never allowed to claim. The space where their own needs are worthy, their own time is sacred, and their own voice is heard. And in doing that, they're not just rewriting their story. They're offering their family something even deeper, a model of emotional maturity, of courage, and of love that includes themselves. Love, real love, is not always about holding on. Sometimes love is about letting go, of roles, of obligations, of identities that no longer fit. And that's where many grandparents find themselves today. They're discovering that stepping back isn't the opposite of love. It's a different form of it, one that trusts, empowers, and gives space to grow. Because here's the truth. Not babysitting doesn't mean not caring. Saying no to constant childcare doesn't mean you've stopped being a grandparent. It means you're showing love in a different, and often braver, way. When a grandparent says, "I think you've got this," what they're really saying is, "I believe in you." When they say, "I need to take care of my health first," they're saying, "I want to be around long enough to see my grandchildren grow up." When they say, "I love spending time with them, but not every day," they're saying, "I want to give them my best, not my burnout." This kind of love lets go of control. It lets go of guilt. It lets go of the lie that being constantly needed is the only way to stay connected. In fact, when grandparents say no to babysitting, they open the door to different and often richer ways of bonding. Story time on the weekend. Trapking. Together once a month. A walk in the park where they're not managing tantrums but creating memories. These aren't just childcare tasks. These are legacy moments. One grandmother who decided to step back after a year of full-time babysitting put it this way: "I realized I didn't want to be the exhausted person my grandkids only saw when their parents were working. I wanted to be the woman who took them to the lake in the summer, who sent them postcards from her road trips, who had the energy to laugh with them. So I let go, not of them, but of the role I never meant to take on permanently. That is love. That is wisdom." Letting go allows the next generation to step into their own power. It invites adult children to seek balance, to find partners, communities, or professional help when needed. It encourages independence, and it models something the whole family benefits from: the ability to love without losing oneself. Because love isn't about doing everything. Sometimes love is knowing when to do less, so you can offer more of who you really are. In many cultures, grandparents are expected to give endlessly, silently, and without complaint. You see it in Asian families, where elders often move in with their adult children and become full-time caretakers. You see it in Latinx homes, where abuelas are the unshakable backbone of the family. You see it in immigrant communities, where multiple generations live under one roof out of necessity, but also because of deeply rooted expectations that grandparents will help out. And while there is beauty in multi-generational living and shared support, there is also a cost that too often goes unspoken. That cost is guilt. The guilt of saying, "I can't today." The guilt of hearing, "You're the only one I trust." The guilt of choosing rest over responsibility, and the shame that follows. But some grandparents are breaking that cycle. They're lovingly, firmly, courageously choosing to stop the pattern of silent sacrifice. They're setting new norms that say love is not measured by how much you give until you collapse. One Vietnamese grandfather shared his story at a community center. "In our culture, we don't say no to family. But I had a stroke. I was caring for 2 toddlers while on blood pressure medication. I finally told my daughter, 'I love them, but I can't keep doing this. I want to live long enough to see them graduate, not die from overwork at 70. She cried me, and then she understood. That understanding isn't always immediate. There may be conflict, hurt feelings, misunderstandings. But ultimately, what emerges is something powerful: respect. When grandparents break the cycle, they show their families what sustainable love looks like. They give the next generation permission to do the same, to ask for help without expecting it to cost someone else their peace. And sometimes, in breaking these patterns, they heal themselves too. They heal the part of them that was told love only counts when it hurts. They heal the part of them that was never allowed to say no. They heal the tired hands and tired hearts that have carried too much for too long. Cultures evolve. Families evolve. And the most courageous elders are the ones who lead that evolution, not by rebelling with bitterness, but by standing tall in quiet dignity and saying, "I have given much. I still have much to give, but I will no longer give at the expense of my well-being." That is not abandonment of culture. That is the growth of it, and it's a gift to everyone who follows. There's a quiet revolution happening, and it's one of joy. More and more grandparents are choosing to redefine what it means to be present, to be involved, to be loving, without sacrificing their health, their time, or their dreams. They are saying no to the old scripts, the ones that told them they were only valuable if they were constantly available, the ones that said they had to be martyrs in order to be remembered with affection. Instead, they're saying yes to joy, joy in the form of unhurried mornings, joy in dancing at weddings instead of rocking cribs, joy in hobbies, travels, books, bridge games, gardening, painting, hiking, pottery, joy in volunteering, mentoring, building community on their own terms. They're showing us that being a grandparent is not about being consumed by responsibility. It's about being a person first, a person who happens to be blessed with grandchildren. That might mean fewer hours of babysitting, but it can also mean deeper moments of connection, because when grandparents protect their energy, they're able to give something even more precious than constant childcare. They give presence, real, joyful, vibrant presence. They bring stories, songs, family recipes, inside jokes, warm hugs that aren't rushed. They bring a sense of wonder. They show grandchildren what aging can look like, not worn down and overworked, but alive and well, with boundaries and boldness, and maybe even a passport full of stamps. Some take their grandchildren on short weekend trips instead of watching them after school every day. Some write letters, record videos, send little surprises in the mail. They become memory makers, not just caretakers. They become a living archive of family history and a radiant example of personal freedom. One 73-year-old woman shared in a local paper, "I'm not the babysitter, I'm the storyteller, the one who shows them how to plant roses, how to make sweet tea, how to laugh until their bellies hurt. That's the kind of grandmother I want to be." That kind of grandparent may not always say yes to babysitting, but their yes to life is something their grandchildren will carry forever. Maybe you've said no recently. Maybe your adult child sighed or rolled their eyes, or made a comment that stung more than you expected. Maybe part of you is still carrying that guilt, the kind that whispers, if you really loved them, you'd help more. But here's what I want you to remember. You don't have to prove your love by draining yourself. You've already done so much. You've raised a family. You've held people together when no one saw. You've worked hard, sacrificed deeply. And now you get to live this chapter fully, joyfully, and with choices that honor you. Saying no to babysitting doesn't mean you're ungrateful. It doesn't mean you're selfish. It means you're wise enough to know your limits, brave enough to protect your peace, loving enough to give without giving yourself away. You are allowed to choose rest. You are allowed to reclaim your time. You are allowed to be a grandparent in your way, not according to anyone else's expectations. And you are still enough. You're enough when you host Sunday dinners. You're enough when you call to say hello. You're enough when you cheer from the sidelines, when you show up with cookies, when you tell bedtime stories over FaceTime. You are enough even when you say, "I love you, but not today." This world doesn't always honor its elders the way it should. But that doesn't mean you have to forget how much value you still hold. You are a keeper of wisdom, a source of love, and a human being who deserves rest, space, and dignity. So if no one has told you lately, let me tell you now, thank you for all you've done, and for having the courage to live this part of your life your way. You don't need permission to say no. But if you were waiting for a little encouragement, here it is. Live freely, love deeply, and never forget, you are enough even when you say no.